We are in the start of a new moment for our country, for your state, whatever state you're in. And we have people coming in from all kinds of states today. If you're listening to the recorded version of this, welcome. Thanks for jumping in. But I do want to emphasize a small thing that it's actually not over yet, right? There's this little detail about these two runoffs in Georgia, right? So it's still it's not done yet. There's some important work that needs to happen. But the way Georgia, the results for November 3rd happened was by bringing people together, bringing lots of people out, right? And so I know that's going to be the continuance of that. But this is a panel about you as a charter leader, whichever charter organization you're with, and what does this new moment mean? It was, I think, extremely difficult in every parts of the states, but we were chatting before, comparing notes, just the panelists here. We have folks from New York and from DC and from Ohio. And Aaliyah, I'm assuming you're also in New York. Is that correct?
I'm in Minnesota.
In Minnesota. Sorry, that's right.
Yeah.
In Minnesota. So I'm reaching out to you this morning from Arkansas on my way to Georgia, but I'm also just drove over from Los Angeles. My point is, it's different in every state, but we need to focus on what's going to work for your community and come together in this new era as it emerges, right? What is this new president going to do? What is this new, what is his cabinet going to do, Biden and Harris? And therefore, we need to be sure and adjust our plans. What are we going to do? And so that is what our panel is about today. We have some excellent folks that are going to introduce themselves and then speak to where they're coming from. And then we are going to allow for some time in this panel to hopefully get some questions from you. Put them in the chat, and my job is to try to track that down and fit it in, right? And so I just want to, again, Captain Obvious here is that if you saw Joe Nathan on the panel, he has been swapped in with Aaliyah Hodge coming from Minnesota, and Joe was able to put his opening comments when we started at 11. But with that, I'm going to turn to our first panelist, Sonia Park, or I'm sorry, Cris. So Cris, tell us about what your plans are. What's your game plan?
What's my game plan? So, I think that for me and for our organization and the organizations I'm a part of, that game plan, I just need to say right off the bat, is a little fluid and it's kind of changing. And so I think for me is not looking at the plan as a solid, like this is how it's going to be and executable, but understanding that the plan is going to be fluid as we move forward, because there's new things kind of developing every day. And this is a very unconventional time and a very unconventional transfer of power, very unconventional everything. So I think that just acknowledging the fact that the plan is going to be not as steady potentially or stable as it usually is. And for me personally, and the Freedom Coalition, as well as my organization, we are turning our attention to the Secretary of Education and what that is going to look like, and how that's going to impact our students and how that's going to impact our communities, because we always talk about how it's going to impact our schools, but when our schools are impacted, our communities are impacted. And if our schools are negatively impacted, our communities are negatively impacted. So it's like when you throw a rock into the water, the ripple effect is much larger than I think people understand or acknowledge.
Hey, Cris, let me just ask you to add in there. I mean, folks read a quick little bio about you on the session, but let's hear it from you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. And then let me also ask you to add in there what the heck's going on in Ohio, right? So it's important for folks in the other states to get the lid, not just what the news says, but let's hear it from you. But tell us about yourself and tell us about Ohio right now.
Okay, so you read my bio, but what's not really in that bio is that I was an at-risk opportunity youth. I was a very unconventional adolescent. That's a way of saying I was very challenging. I had a lot of I was on house arrest, which is kind of like why I'm really good at quarantining. I think that's an adult. But I had a very challenging upbringing, and it kind of, and in the 80s and the 90s, there was not an option for my parents, and so it was just like there was not a lot for me. So when I came on the other side and kind of came through all of that, my passion and my purpose lies in my proximity to the experiences that I had. So my background is in public policy and focused on education reform. I've worked in private organizations, nonprofit organizations, and also at the Department of Education for several years. And now I work on advocacy pretty much exclusively um, for Oakmont Education, and I also work with the I'm on the steering committee for the Freedom Coalition, which is work I absolutely love. So I'm tied to purpose, not a company or an organization, and that's just kind of how I've carried myself. I've been involved with charter schools since 2002. So it's been a minute. And I'm turning 18. I guess I turned 18 this year in the charter space. So that's a pretty big milestone for me. But I'm very excited to be here, and I'm really appreciative to be part of this really awesome panel.
Cris, let me ask you to expand on an important point. All of us as charter leaders need to recognize, again, Captain Obvious here, that there is federal policy towards education and towards charter schools, right? And we're excited about how that's going to change, and what do we got to do to make sure it changes in our favor. But then it's very specific to each state. Right. And so I work in California, even though I'm in Arkansas this morning. What happens in California is not necessarily the same as what's the dynamics that are happening in the states of the folks that are here. So can you talk a little bit about that difference? Because in terms of our game plan, we need to adjust our federal understanding to what's happening in our state. Talk a little bit about that.
About Ohio?
Yes.
So in Ohio, historically, charter schools have been supported by the GOP, the Republican Party. And so for many cycles in the legislature now, Ohio has had a supermajority. And charter schools have not necessarily flourished under them. I don't think charter schools have necessarily flourished anywhere, in the past 4+ years. But in Ohio, the temperature is moderate, I would say. It's a moderate. And I think we're going to see some more openness to types of school choice. In Ohio, we have a very much bifurcated choice movement where there's vouchers, which is extremely contentious in Ohio right now. And then also public charter school choice. So you have kind of those two that are lumped in with school choice together, but are very different in the state of Ohio. The public vouchers are going to private schools. So that's a huge issue that the districts are now taking on with choice people for vouchers. So charters often will get, in Ohio, when they say school choice, a lot of times in Ohio, people mean vouchers. They don't really necessarily understand public school, charter schools, dropout recovery types of charter schools. And I personally am taking a lot of my time and effort to talk to the different caucuses, the Democratic representatives in my communities where I live, where my sons, I have 3 sons that are in public schools, where we live, and trying to have them understand my perspective as a progressive woman, a Latin woman, in how school choice with public charter schools is self-determination, is a civil right, is a human right. And moves well beyond, adult interests, union interests, or any of the political aspirations or ego that is involved with so many things in the choice movement.
So, Cris, as the moderator, I'm going to moderate here for a second. And I want to recontextualize a word that you used. I do believe charter schools have flourished in every state. I think what you mean is that the political context in each state has made it so hard.
We haven't grown, I think, is the better term. We're flourishing in our own microcosms.
Okay,
However,
so
the environment for growth has been, we have no sunlight. So our plants are thriving because we adapt like a plant does when the light goes away. However, we're trying to grow through to the light, and it's very small. So we want that support. We want the opportunity to really flourish to our full potential. So thank you for clarifying.
And what that points to, embedded in that, is that you are described a very divided government situation in Ohio, and that's what is up for us as a country as a whole, right? And so, and part of understanding and people setting their next game plan is how do we move forward within a divided government, um, to be differentiated from, say, a hijacked economy. Okay, I'm not going to expand on that too much, but we're moving from something that was hijacked to something now that is polarized, contentious, and divided. But there is a governance. There is an expectation of governance going forward. So that's my little editorial there. But in terms of expanding on your point there, you mentioned the term voucher and choice, actually, how choice means something different in each state. In your case, it's clouded over with the voucher thing. And I think it is going to be part of our mission to, as educators, to help the populace in our states disentangle that, not let it get abused the way, say, certain national players are taking things out of context, right? And so maybe speak to that. And then second, with the few minutes that we have left in your time here, you also called out we're not just one thing, right? We're not just the Republicans or the Democrats, right? And for that matter, it's not just the Latino vote or the Black vote. It's different in every single community. You identified that. I appreciate you doing that for the Latinos. Different in every state, different in every community, and what does it mean to be progressive? So I don't know if you can touch on all of that in the 2 minutes that are left, but I just wanted to highlight some great points that you made.
Yeah, I think that for the short time we have left here, for me, I'm really hounding what it means to be a progressive. I'm a Cuban American, and for me, being progressive means accepting that people want to have that self-determination and understanding that because a neighborhood school might not work for somebody, and it doesn't necessarily mean because it's failing. If it just does not work for a student, I don't understand why a progressive, and unfortunately often, the teachers union is lumped into that, which is 80% white female, gets to say, actually, I know what's best. Let me tell you what's best to do with your child. Because, with all due respect, when I was pregnant with all of my children, I had the autonomy to make choices over my body and my reproductive rights. And people, my progressive friends and counterparts, they applaud that. They carry that forward, that choice over my body, my reproductive rights. However, I'm really tripped up, and I continue to be, and I still haven't found a good answer from anybody on when does the lever get pulled that my actual choice is no longer viable? Why, once my child is born, I no longer understand what is best for my family, myself, and my child. And so I'm going to need to hound the progressive kind of ideology that progressive means public neighborhood school, public labor unions, public this. It is not. These are public charter schools, and we can't keep saying, oh, but, because that's not progressive. It's not progressive to push people out that are viable, valuable, critical players and components.
Cris, anybody who's on this session who thought this was going to be kind of one of those bland, easy to follow virtual conference things, I'll just mute and play solitaire on the side. If that statement or statements that Cris just made, all 20 of them, didn't get you going, I don't know what is, right? So there was a whole lot of hot button issues in there. And this is about, we are not, as charter leaders, we are not afraid to jump in on the hard stuff, right? We're not trying to status quo, figure it out. We're out there in front, right? You need a game plan that is ready to take the lead on this. So Cris, thank you for talking to us from your perspective as a Cubana, as a person from Ohio. Let's move on. Because I know we can go another couple hours just with that. But this is a panel. Debbie, thanks for joining us. Tell us where you're coming from. Tell us where you're and what's your game plan.
Thank you for having me, Ricardo. So I am with the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools, and we are the nation's national advocacy organization on behalf of charter schools. So this is single site schools, it's CMOs, it's policy work at the state level, at the federal level, and my particular role is really around strategic communications. And so when I think about what our plan is going forward, our game plan is a fight plan because we have got a battle on our hands in a number of places and with a number of different audiences. So one of the things that we are looking at right now is this Georgia runoff election. And we are educating both candidates on where their own constituents sit on charter schools. So there's this really awesome piece of research that was done by the Georgia State Association, which shows that somewhere upwards of 65% of all people in the state of Georgia support charter schools. And this is pretty consistent across demographic groups. So these are Republicans, they're Democrats, these are Black families, they're Latino families, these are white families, men, women. And so we're educating the candidates with a specific campaign targeted at them to make sure they know that. And then we're going to ask them some tough questions about where they stand on equitable treatment of charter schools. And we're going to share that information publicly. Another of the things that we're doing is some digital ads that actually target those candidates to let them know publicly that we know what support for charter schools look like in their states. And it's important that I underscore that we're not just bipartisan, we are nonpartisan as an organization. We got no permanent friends, we got no permanent enemies. If you are with us, great. And if you're not, we're coming for you. We will fight anybody that is going to get in the way of delivering a high quality public education to every child in America. So again, if you're with us, that's great. And if you're not, we're coming for you. We are working also on a coalition letter, several versions of them that talk about the characteristics of what a great Secretary of Education should look like. So a lot of people are opining right now about who might be good candidates. There's some names, I'm sure you guys have heard some of them that have been floated around. And we are, rather than picking winners or picking candidates at this point, we're talking about what a good candidate should look like. So we have been thrilled to work with our friends at the Freedom Coalition. And I know a couple of you guys on this panel are closely affiliated with the Freedom Coalition, but we've been thrilled to work with them. And we've come up with a combined set of criteria that we think should be what you would measure any good Secretary of Education by. So like first one is students and families first. So we don't want a Secretary of Education who puts special interest groups or adult interests above or before students and family interests. Another is a commitment to high quality schools. So we don't want a Secretary of Education who is committed to a governance model rather than high quality schools. And the Secretary must be agnostic about governance models or types of schools. We really need to be committed to high quality schools. And another one is empowering teachers and leaders. So, and we believe that empowering teachers and leaders means that you give them the ability to be the professionals that they are, that you allow them to be able to serve their students in the way that works for them, giving them that kind of flexibility like we have in charter schools. Another is reimagining learning. We are not on stone tablets anymore, and so we really need to have a Secretary of Education that understands that we have got to be able to think into the future. We need some innovation, and anyone that is trying to stymie that and keep our children in the Stone Age is not going to be a good Secretary of Education. We also are obviously very interested and supportive of equity in education, and we cannot have a Secretary of Education without a demonstrated commitment to equity in education. And that looks like empowering Black and Brown school leaders. That looks like lifting up our Black and Brown students and our low-income families and just really being a unifier and being committed to equity. And then this last thing is we believe it's important for a Secretary of Education to have systems experience. And we say systems, not districts, because a lot of people will say, oh, you have to run a district. We say a collection of schools. Because if you have run multiple schools, you understand the complexity of having to deal with multiple stakeholders. And you cannot be ideological. You can't just hold on to whatever you think is right, because you've got to know how to deal with different stakeholders. And we think that type of balanced perspective is really important for the next secretary.
So, Debbie, you, again, some really a lot of points to unpack there, and allow me to point to some. And I'm going to try to incorporate what I'm seeing coming across in the chats here. All right. But number one, your game plan, and by you I mean the National Alliance, is a fight plan, right? And you're focusing right now. The first part of that, the first round of that, if you will, is on the selection for Secretary of Education. You also talk about the need to put as a priority high quality schools, and we have a chat there that is a pretty simple but critical and hard one. How do we define high quality schools? All right, now I'm going to frame it in a certain way, and Debbie asked you to comment on this, right? But in one way, you said one that is equitable, one that serves all the students, right, and is not leaving behind a certain sector, right? But let me pose this, what I'm going to call the pandemic compromise, right? And it's how, as a society, we've written off, obviously, the fall semester. It's okay, sorry, hey, what we can do, give it your best shot with distance learning, but it's okay if nothing really happens, all right? It's not okay for me, and I believe that's what you're getting at, that as charter leaders and as an alliance, we need to be doing way better. And if anybody thinks that we're just going to write off the spring semester also, definitely not at my school, not with our families, not at our communities. And we need to be committed as leaders, as education leaders. And I think what I understood you to say is that the Alliance is going to push the new administration, the new secretary, is, hey, enough of the compromise during this pandemic. How are we going to adapt now? Right? Not sit around and wait for some when are we getting back to normalcy thing happening. So I don't know. Is that a setup, or did I say too much?
No, that's spot on. And if I can just shout out all of the charter leaders that are on the panel today, and those that are listening in, you guys are just like kicking booty. I love what you're doing. The innovation, the way to pivot quickly to be adaptive to the needs of your students and your families. You are crushing it. When we did some research at the National Alliance on how schools reacted during the pandemic, and no secret to you, there were a number of district public schools where the babies were getting maybe 30 minutes of instruction a week. Whereas we had tiny charter schools, small but mighty, independent charter schools that found the way within a week of school closures to make sure that their babies were getting something quite close to full-time instruction, if not literally the exact same amount of instruction they had during a brick and mortar school building. That's the type of innovation that we're talking about. It is a commitment to making sure that our babies are learning and doing whatever it takes for that to happen.
So on the specific chat, I offer that in this context today for this panel, high quality means right now is putting the education of these kids right now, adapting right now to do more than just checking in. And it also includes, and we'll leave for other panelists, the social emotional part, supporting the families, all those other dimensions. Okay, so and then I do want to recognize that another person in the comment box, and I invite people, use the comments. I'm going to interpret the statement from Colin in terms of the conflation of so many of the terms that we're focusing on, and that's what makes it difficult. In this case, privatization. Right? Oh yeah, you guys are trying to privatize public education. That is an oversimplification, and it's going to be something that we need to address. But I need to move to our next panelist. And again, I invite folks to put stuff in the comment box. I'm going to try to keep up as fast as I can with them. And we are going to allow in the last 10 minutes of this panel for us to address more open. But let me move here to Ms. Hodge from Minnesota. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what's happening in your state.
Thanks, guys. So my name is Aaliyah Hodge, and I wear about a dozen hats. I'm a charter school authorizer at the University of St. Thomas. I'm the vice president of the Minnesota Association of Charter School Authorizers. I work closely with Joe on looking at data for both charter schools, district schools, and we also look at data for dual credit. And then in my spare time, I run a youth-led nonprofit, which focuses on expanding choice via dual credit opportunities. So before I kick off, I kind of wanted to answer Colin's question. I always hear that in Minnesota that, oh, charter schools are just privatizing education. In my opinion, I don't know anything that's more public than a group of community members coming together and saying, this is what I want our kids to learn. You have parents involved, you have students involved. So I don't know if there's any other school form more public than that. But I guess just to kick us off, so I want to talk a little bit about the Minnesota environment, and then I want to touch a little bit about the work that we're doing as the Minnesota Association of Charter School Authorizers. And I'm talking a little bit about the work that I do leading youth in policy discussions, and then just a bit about what I've learned from lobbying. So Minnesota is kind of small, which shouldn't be surprising to folks. We've got about 167 charter schools, give or take one or two pre-operational ones, serving about 62,000 kids. So in Minnesota, enrollment in public charter schools has increased from about 10,000 students in 2001 to now 62 in the 2019-2020 school year, which is accounting for about 7% of our public school enrollment. And what I think sets us apart from other places is that we have about 50% of the kids going to charter schools live in our cities, and 50% of the kids attending charter schools live in our suburban and rural communities. So throughout the state, there's charter schools serving all kinds of kids. Another thing that I want to raise up is that on average, percentages of students who are low income, students of color, English language learners are higher in our charter schools. And there's really not a difference between the charter schools serving special ed students and then the district schools serving special ed students, which is something that we hear a lot in the national narrative. Like, oh, you guys are choosing students. Nope. We're open to all. So some of the work that we're doing as an association of charter school authorizers, we do a lot of policy work. We have a policy committee. So a lot of our policy work focuses on just giving information to people and existing as a resource. And we also do have bills that we support and a policy platform that we put forward every year. So it's a little of both. So one thing that we do, we always have a charter day at the Capitol. So this is where we drop off we drop off bundt cakes. We're really famous for our bundt cakes now, and they've just gotten bigger and bigger every year. So that those meetings, we meet with everyone in the House and Senate Finance Committees, Education Committee, and the Education Finance Committee, sorry. We introduce ourselves, what is authorizing, because nobody knows what an authorizer is. We talk a little bit about our charter schools, and then either if we someone, we will have that conversation, and if not, we'll definitely schedule a meeting with them to follow up at a later time. And we also do one-on-one meetings with all of the Minnesota elected officials, like our senators and our representatives. And so in those meetings, we like to involve students and parents, because at the end of the day, I can talk a million years about charter schools, but what's really powerful is to get the students and the parents involved. We also work in encouraging our elected leaders to visit authorized schools. There are so many conversations I have with folks who are like, well, I'd like to visit a charter school. And I always tell them, well, if you visit one charter school, you're visiting one charter school. They're so different. And so it's really to get people in the building to see what good work our schools are doing. And so a lot of the things that we do as MAXA, we try and build a lot of coalitions and collaboration in Minnesota. So like I said, we work with the Minnesota Parent Union, which is a great group to be working with because they're pretty bipartisan. They work with traditional districts and they work with charter schools. We work with the state's Charter School Association as well on policy things. We work with the Center for School Change on policy things. We worked with them collaboratively trying to get some housing things figured out in the St. Paul City Council as well as the Minneapolis City Council. We work with our other ed policy organizations such as Ed Allies and GMS. I also do want to talk about the importance of youth-led change. So like I said, in my limited spare time, I run an organization that's entirely youth-led. And so I say youth-led meaning our ED graduated high school like 2 years ago. Our board members, half of them are high school students. Our committees are made up of high school students. Our volunteers are high school students. And that's really what's made us so impactful at the legislature. None of us are lobbyists, but it's important to have the people who are directly impacted by policies leading these conversations. So we have students who set our policy platform. We have students who meet with the legislators. We have students who are drafting the bill language. We have students who are testifying. So it's entirely student run and student led. And I know that part of the session is also, what's your game plan? How can you get support for chartering? Number one, involve parents and students when meeting with folks. Like I said, let's have those who are directly affected by this issue, the ones whose voices we are raising up. Like I said, at the end of the day, I can talk about this for hours, but there's nothing more impactful from hearing from a parent as to why they chose to send their kids here when other options weren't available, or from a student, how they've been successful in a charter school, whereas they weren't in other places. And so obviously, if possible, we try and get someone within their district. It just makes that connection a little easier. One other thing that I've learned is not to assume anything. Both Democrats and Republicans, they'll surprise you. There's many times that we're meeting with folks that we have, someone might say, oh, well, my son goes to a charter school, or I went to a charter school. And you're like, oh, wow, that's a great connection. And use those connections to, build, like I said, further connections. And like I said before, stories matter. Stories really are impactful and they're powerful. Anecdotal evidence, especially when coupled with quantitative data, it's impactful, it's powerful, and really encourage your elected leaders to think differently and confront their own assumptions. When we meet one-on-one with folks, that's something that we always talk about. What have you heard about Minnesota? Sometimes folks will say, like, well, we heard that charter schools don't have elected boards. And you're like, you know what? That's not true in Minnesota. We do. So it's really trying to hear what they're hearing and then giving them actual information on what the situation looks like. Because at the end of the day, they're going to make decisions regardless. And we want to be at the table. We want to either have the impact on their decision making, or we want to have some sort of knowledge of what's happening. And then I guess the last thing I really wanted to touch on is like working with young people in general. And this is like actual engagement of young people, not just, oh, we'll tap them in once in a while to speak. The number one thing to me is youth engagement is all about collaboration. The contributions, perspectives, and the concerns of young people, they should always be taken into consideration. And they should influence the decisions that are being made. One thing that I've heard from our students is, we allow a safe, innovative space for them. And I think that's just incredibly important when we want young people to not only, talk to their leaders or whatever, but also to become advocates and ambassadors in their own communities for chartering.
Aaliyah, lots to unpack there. Great points. Let me point to some things and also try to pull from the comment box. But number one is you're highlighting the role that authorizers play, different in every state. And thank you for sharing about the Minnesota piece. I think that gets to the opening statement that Joe Nathan sent for us, that we're talking about the verb chartering. Right, we are charter schools, but what does chartering mean? And that is so lost on so many people. But I think you were able to speak to that from the role as an authorizer. Thank you. This is an awesome thing that you said. That what more bigger public mission, public impact can you have, right? Than to be focusing on kids, and then even that one's another big one. That this is about youth. I want to highlight that one analysis of the November results was that anybody who this was not their first time voting was an even split, 49%, 49%. What that means is that these outcomes were determined just by first time voters, That's what made the difference here. And those were youth. So how much more important do you want to make than that? And then you also pointed to listening to others, right? And you will be surprised. I think that's a new slogan right there, right? Be the change. How about be surprised? If you are surprised, that means you are actually listening to the other side to find out what was different. So definitely, folks, I'm going to take that one on today. Be surprised and be surprised at what the other person thinks, and be surprised at what you can do. Be surprised at what we can do. So thank you for that. I'm going to now move forward to our next panelist, and I'm going to remind folks, put stuff in the comments, and we are going to try to have an open conversation after this next panelist. So, Sonia, tell us about a little about yourself, the perspective you're coming from, what's your game plan. And I do want to point, folks, that she brought the fans from the World Series and the NBA Finals. You could see them behind there, so they're going to cheer accordingly. Thank you, Sonia.
Thanks, Ricardo. Hi, I'm Sonia Park. I'm Executive Director of the Diverse Charter Schools Coalition. So we're a coalition of intentionally diverse charter schools. Right now we have 65 member school networks, which totals over 190 individual charters across 22 states and DC. I'm also doing my pandemic sit in Brooklyn, New York, so I can talk a little bit about what's happening in the blue state of New York. But I think overall, I wanted to focus on what, Ricardo, you said in the beginning with Joe about charter schools we're moving forward and we're not waiting for folks to tell us how we should do things and what we should respond to. And I think we all know this, that what's happening on the national scale is going to impact our work, but also everything is for schools, charters are hyper localized. So we can't forget, and I know we are all really aware of what's happening in our city council, on our district level, state level, all those elections that also took place that are still being decided that can sway our local landscape. So in New York, for instance, there was conversations about having a supermajority of Democrats in the state. That's not going to happen, not likely going to happen. There's still some ballots being counted, which means that they would, if they had supermajority, they would be able to override any decision that the governor would make. And right now, in New York State, there's a difference between charters in New York City versus the rest of the state. So in New York City, there's a cap of 250 charters. We're at that cap. And their hope was that we would be able to open up the charter law again and allow for more charters to be allocated to New York City. That's not going to happen. There's still never charters available upstate. And so there's still a lot of play about like what it actually means to have a charter versus not have a charter versus like going way down the hole about zombie charters. I know that's a very New York City specific type of conversation, and also to add another term to what we talked about when we're looking at vouchers, private versus public, and New York City. There's a conflation between screened schools and charter schools. So there has been a move in New York City to eliminate screened schools for screened public schools like a magnet school, but on a larger scale. And charters have been sort of put into that bucket also, even though charters don't screen and they are schools of choice, but they're seeing it as going beyond what is your zoned area. And so that makes it a little more, confusing, I think, for local electeds understanding what the difference is. And so from our perspective, in New York State, in New York City, it's that constant conversation with the turnover with local electeds, making sure they understand what charter schools are, the populations that we serve. And I think to Aaliyah's point, like a lot of them actually have connection to charter schools, that they have their kids in charter schools, or they have a cousin that does, or they are okay with the school in their district. They just don't like all the others. And so that's part of what's happening right now. And it has become very, very, again, hyper localized, where you have to do a lot of direct outreach to your local electeds, to your board of regent representative, so that they actually get to know you on an individual basis as a school versus understanding the sector overall in the city, in the state, and then also, going beyond nationally. And I think that's part of the heavier lift that we need to do, is the constant education and re-education about who are in the positions of power right now that are supposedly representing us. So, and separate from that, I want to emphasize too that the flexibility that a lot of schools I see in New York State, but also within the coalition, and how they're meeting the challenge of not just the pandemic, but also the social justice movement, and how they're being really responsive to their community. So whether they are serving as food banks and distribution centers, hotspots and Wi-Fi, let alone technology and distributions to their families. We have schools, even in New York City, that are fully in person, and others that have chosen to go fully remote until March, and not beholden as much to the decisions of the governor and the mayor, except when they have to be. And so that's the tension about being the best that we can and serving our communities, but also being mindful of what's happening around us. And I think the last part I want to make, Ricardo, about that is that we can't forget, and I think this is the hard part too, that we as charters, that we are part of the community and we're representing the community, and sometimes we have to be vocal about that. I know a lot of leaders would, especially now with all the changes, and some of it is reflecting on budgetary cuts, that they don't necessarily want to make a lot of noise, keep their head down. Hopefully things will pass by, and then they could, just keep doing what they're doing and not draw a lot of attention to the work that they're doing. And I would actually push for the opposite, because as everyone has already said, charters have been really responsive, and they're actually being much more connected than, in comparison, their local district school. And you don't have to say we are better or we're doing more than your district counterpart, but you can say this is what we're doing. This is how we're doing it. And it's not really negating district, but it's really uplifting your own voice. I think that draws the right sort of attention, especially when we're seeing what's happening right now.
Sonia, thank you. You really had me scared with zombie charters, right? And but it's this last thing that you said is what I see as actually the anecdote, right? If you are not being vocal, then you are a zombie charter leader. Do not be a zombie. Get out there and talk about what you're doing, what your school is doing, how your communities are reacting, and that's going to be the way that we move forward. I want to offer some thinking here in terms of what you pointed to, and the fact that things are hyper local. You talked a little bit about the supermajority that was projected for New York. That's something that has existed in California for several years now, and that the anti-charter forces have used their supermajority. And I've heard several people talk about how, oh boy, here it comes again, this California wave that's going to come across the country. But I offer this, being in California right now, right? And it's something that I learned from my grandparents, right? No hay mal que por bien no viene. My version of that is, sometimes it's so bad, it's good. Now, it is bad right now. And let me put something in here that's a little bit sobering, right? It's taken 250,000 people to die because of COVID, right? And we're going to 500,000. I mean, that's a number that it's just so scary, right? We put it out of our mind. It's already been 250,000. It's going to get to 500,000 probably by next summer, right? We need to do something, and we need to do something right now. We are not waiting, and we have to adapt, and we have to use our schools to adapt. And you pointed out, all of us have pointed out how in our states, charter schools are doing something. I know that everyone on this session is doing something, right? But we got to be your point is we got to be more vocal about it and make sure that people don't understand that there are these other options there. But my point is that I think COVID is putting the brakes on what the supermajority was supposed to do in California, right? And I think that is an opportunity, if you can think of a crazy opportunity from COVID, but it's forcing everybody to change. And whatever machinations they had for supermajorities is probably not going to happen this year or next year. Maybe later, but not if we fight. Let's take Debbie's point. Let's fight. Let's not be zombies. Let's be surprised. Let's surprise them. Okay, so thank you, Sonia. Let me see some points that are coming up from the comment box here. We do have a couple more minutes for our session here, and I'm going to invite folks, put something up on the comment. I'll try to form it into a question and direct it at one of our panelists. Let me go back to the beginning then, in terms of who we heard here. Cris, add something to what you're hearing. I mean, I'm sure the zombie comment prompted something.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was thinking about in Ohio, there's been a mentality of the lowest nail for a very long time. The lowest nail doesn't get the hammer. So just like lay low, like what Sonia was saying, like chill out, like lay low. Don't come up and talk about, don't be proud. You don't need to be tooting your own horn. Don't share your stories really like outside of your little microcosm. And I really think that we should build on what Sonia said there. And now is the time to start amplifying what we're doing and be loud and start sharing, getting our students out there, getting our families out there, and showing and not saying like, again, like it doesn't have to be a competition. We're just saying we're showcasing this capacity and that we have and the agency of these families and these students. That's powerful. And I think that getting rid of the lowest nail mentality, we're just going to have to go be brave out there doing it.
Cris, let's make this real in terms of, give me one example of a group in Ohio that's doing what you're saying.
I mean,
concrete description.
We serve dropout recovery students in our network of schools, only dropout students. Our average student is almost 19, fourth or fifth grade reading level, 4 out of 20 credits when they get to us. So we've partnered with an organization called Rise Up. They're in DC, they're credentialing, and we are career tech focused, but now we are getting our students that are coming in, credentialing them in high need, essential working jobs, LPNs, customer care. We have students that are now going to be employed and are employed as essential workers during the pandemic. So, and they're motivated and they're proud. And those stories, we're going to be sharing more and more of those stories. But this is not the thing is we're not a unique circumstance. We are, I believe, in the work we do, but across the country, charter schools are rising well above and beyond, the needs. My own 3 sons, I have a senior, a sophomore, and a 5th grader. They were getting maybe 1 hour of school a week in their former traditional district. Maybe. That's when a Zoom worked. Maybe. So it's time we toot our own horns a little bit because our students deserve it and our families deserve it because they don't get the recognition they deserve. Like our students, they're giving us another opportunity to serve them. It's not their last shot. It's our last shot to serve them because we failed them so many times.
Thanks, Cris. I'm going to keep going around here. Debbie, something that triggered for you from the panelists here, and I ask that you try to include a concrete example of this is how it's happening with these people right now.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that came up was the discussion about the role of the white progressive and how we have a group of people who are ideologically aligned with what a lot of us believe, but we seem to fall apart on the issue of charter schools. So specifically, we are doing some research right now. In fact, the survey is in the field today, and we are looking within the next week or two to be able to share what's in the mind of the white progressive. Like, how is it you got a Black Lives Matter sign in your yard and like you've got an adopted sponsored child from Kenya and you're like volunteering with Planned Parenthood and you're trying to get rid of the charter schools? I mean, this just isn't, it's not working. So we are looking to kind of unpack the mind of the white progressive and to determine the most effective language that we can use. We just did some research of a qualitative part of it in DC, where we literally heard people say, I understand why people like charter schools. I just don't think that we should have them. I understand that they serve children better, but I just don't think we should have them.
Well, and I think that is then it leads to the conversation. Let's talk about why we should, because you've obviously heard why we haven't, right? This is an opportunity to jump in there. And let me go then next to Aaliyah. And Aaliyah, one thing that you said I think flows right from that is you were talking about Minnesota and different ways of understanding there, and you made an important difference that has played out so much in looking at the election results: urban versus suburban. right? And how you were saying, wait, there's charter support in the urban context and the suburban context. However, it's easy to see how that cuts across this situation of the white progressives
Mhm.
and where that plays. So do you want to expand on that point, or toss it aside and tell us what you want to say?
No, I mean, I feel like Minnesota, we're called sometimes the Great White North, because we can be incredibly not woke. I'm trying to say it in a really diplomatic way, but we really struggle sometimes with racism in our state. Um, and we can see that especially when we think about charter schools. It's interesting in Minnesota because a lot of times it plays off as chartering is, a way for white people to keep their kids out of the district schools, or that's a tool that, you know, those who are against charters have really used to galvanize support for their issues. But one thing I did really want to mention from what you said, Sonia, is zombie schools. We have a lot of zombie authorizers. At least we initially did. I think that for a long time, authorizers, we sat in the back and we said, well, our job is just accountability. Our job is just oversight. We don't really need to get into the policy sphere. We don't really need to do any advocacy. But the stakes are so high, we need to. If people are sitting there and saying that there is no accountability for charter schools and we exist as the body of accountability, we need to be in this. We can't just sit off on the sides and be like, oh man, they haven't noticed us. No. We need to be in this fight. I think about we see so many problems within our system. For example, in Minnesota, our teaching force is 94% white, which I'm sure is similar in a lot of other states. We see that as a problem. We know that's a problem. So this year we're going to do something about it. We're going to go and we're going to start talking about it. We have a whole increasing teachers of color bill that we want to push. So I think we all know what the problems are. We need to now go out and actually do something about it. We have to use the power that we have, and we have to use the voice that we have in our platforms to advocate for our kids.
Aaliyah, thank you. And let me combine a couple things there. In terms of the Great White North and the Deep South, and if we're getting surprised right now, we're getting surprised by Georgia. And it's Georgia that's showing, wait a second, there's another way to do this. Whatever you think are your limits in your state, there's a way to break through this. And again, they're doing it with kids. They're doing it with youth. They're doing it by reaching out and getting new voters. And so I think Georgia is the big surprise for all of us, and what we can do on what we did on November 3rd and what we're going to do on January 5th. Sonia, let's see how you want to jump in there and maybe describe something specific or react to any of these awesome comments.
I'll start with something specific, something that everybody can do, a parent, school leader, advocacy organization, that right now is a relatively low lift, is putting in a statement into a local hearing, district hearing, legislative hearing. So an organization here in New York City Charter Schools Center puts out blast to school saying the city council is holding a hearing on remote learning. It's not charter specific, but that doesn't mean that you can't put in and describe in a written statement how you have been responsive and how you're serving your community. So it's another example of highlighting your work without denigrating somebody else's work. And so they're doing this. And as an organization, the Diverse Charter Schools Coalition, we've actually put in written statements in DC and in St. Louis and other areas where now, since everything is really Zoom, you can still put in and give a verbal statement. You can submit a written statement, and you again are uplifting your voice in a way that isn't as, for some folks, as intimidating as actually going down to City Hall or going to the state capitol and putting out your statement in that forum. So this is a good way to start talking to folks that you may not have felt 100% comfortable to do in the first place. And I think in reaction to what everyone else is saying too about like the white progressives, I'm going to say it, like I am in deep down blue Brooklyn, right? And I am not just somebody who strongly believes in charter schools. I used to be an authorizer for the New York City DOE. I'm a charter school parent. My son went K-8 charters, and even within my community, to Debbie's point, like I still talk to parents who look at me and give me that side eye, like, oh, you support charters. I'm like, I do. All in my neighborhood. And we have a lot of schools, charter schools that are in the coalition, and I'm a strong advocate, but it's still like, the playground politics where people will like take a step back or start to lecture you about all these things that are wrong with charters. And I'm like, well, and so, being prepared to say like, well, why do you mean, what do you say about that? And, oh, so your son got into a G&T program at 5 because you prepped them for 2 months before the test, private tutoring to get them into that G&T program. And that's more fair than a blind lottery through a charter school. So it's that sort of thing where I feel like we have to be our own advocates, and sometimes it's that other burden, right, on top of everything else, like trying to talk somebody to understand, if they don't have to agree, but at least acknowledge that this is an open conversation, that nothing is, there's no right or wrong. A lot of times that there has to be the ability to have an open conversation. And I just want to go back to, someone had a comment, I think it was Colin, who made a reference to the elephant in the room, and Betsy DeVos and her pro-charter stance. I want to make sure that we talk about that and we don't like sweep it under the rug. But I think that's part of the conversation, that there is no Republicans are this and Democrats are that. If we look at prior administrations, both Democrat and Republicans, they all supported charters. So we just can't keep going down one side or the other. It has to be something that we can all come together on, because we are talking about, it's, I like to see it as not just a charter school debate, but it's really like high quality choice. We need to make sure that every student, every family, no matter what community they're in, has the ability to choose a school that's most appropriate for them. And it could be the district school, it could be a charter school, but it shouldn't have to be an either or. It should be an and.
Sonia, I hear your fans back there behind you are cheering you on, so thank you for that. This is, let's be surprised. Let's listen to our folks. What an awesome point that through this COVID moment, actually, there's a way to have more people get involved, right? More people get involved. I mean, how many folks from Brooklyn can get up to an Albany public hearing session, but you can definitely Zoom in, right? So let's recognize, and I think charter leaders are recognizing these opportunities. I want to describe a specific thing that's happening in Los Angeles, right? And that has to do with COVID testing, right? COVID is about public health, right? Sure, we need the vaccine, and it's going to be a while till people get vaccinated, but the best inoculation right now is just people being smart, right? People, yes, actually the mask does help, right? And so I can go on and on about that. But testing has been so under-emphasized, right? Yes, you're wearing a mask. Thank you. You're being socially distanced. Good. But do you know if you are asymptomatic right now, there's only one way: you got to get tested. And schools can be the catalyst for massively increasing testing, right? So in Los Angeles, schools have come together. There's now a collective, and we're going to be able to dramatically expand testing. Testing every week, all staff and kids, right? And so I encourage folks to think about other options. Obviously, it's for another conversation. The testing is being used in this Machiavellian tug of war with L Unified. Let's not get into that. But what can we do different? How can we use COVID to show folks that, hey, we're going to get past this. We're not zombies. You don't have to wait for a vaccine to come. There's things that you can do right now. And I think charter leaders are showing that in every state, how we're doing that. So we got about 5 more minutes. I'm trying as best I can to be sure we grab comments. For all you folks that are excited about this conversation, this is an exciting conversation. But I want to challenge you. Throw in some hard ones. You saw these people; they're all ready to talk about hard stuff, right? And so we got a couple more minutes here. Toss in a hard one. Throw a bomb in here, folks. Let's get this to the finish line with some hard points.
Yeah,
And
Debbie's ready to handle a hard question.
so as we're waiting for this to come up, and I'm going to track this carefully. I see a point here about student learning is not a one size fits all process, right? I think that was the comment about it's hyper localized. It's that we need to be addressing the needs. I think the term as educators that we differentiate the learning for students. Well, we got to make sure we differentiate our policy as well, right? And so I hope I captured that one. Let me ask each one panelist, and Cris, I'm going to go with you first. I'm going to take it in the same order, but just think of the one word. What's the one word that we need to close out with? And zombie's already been taken. Right? So what's one word that you want to have the folks that tuned in for us? And also let's remember the folks that are going to listen to this in a recorded method. What's the one word you want to task people on the way out? What's the exit ticket?
For me, resilience. Resilience is my word for where we are and who we are and who our students and families are is resilience.
Resilience. Got it. Debbie.
Ground game. Get your ground game tight. We are representing 3.3 million students. They've got families, and these families can be deployed to fight for us. Get your ground game tight.
3.3 million students is like 10 million family members, right? So that ain't no small amount,
No.
right? And they're not going to get left behind. Aaliyah, one word.
Yep. Platform. Everyone has a platform and use it. We all have voices that matter. Our students matter. Our parents matter, and all of their choices should be respected.
Okay. Sonia.
I would say fearless, that we need to keep pushing and not be afraid to do this right now, because I think we say this a lot in the charter sector, like we're at crunch time, but I feel like this is really it. There's so many intersections of inflection, right? So COVID, racial justice, changing administration, funding, all these things are happening right now. And if we don't say something, if we are afraid to be that nail that sticks up, then we may just be cut off. So be fearless.
Absolutely. COVID is scaring everybody. And if COVID ain't scaring you, it better be scaring you. It should be scaring you, right? But being scared, don't be panicked. Don't be paralyzed. All right. Everyone should be scared right now, and therefore we should be doing something right now, right? Who is not scared right now is a zombie. A zombie doesn't get scared. So don't be a zombie, right? Let's get out there and do what we got to do. Okay. I'm ask folks. We're closing up here. So thank you, the panelists. Thank you, Cris, coming to us from Ohio. Thank you, Debbie from DC, Aaliyah from Minnesota, Sonia from Brooklyn, New York. I'm based in Los Angeles, but I'm talking to you today from Arkansas on my way to Georgia. I'm going down there. So we're gonna make things happen again on January 5th. This is a new moment. We are going to be surprised, and we're going to surprise folks on what these outcomes are. So this panel is then closing off. Encourage folks who didn't catch it on the recording. We have a recording of it. We have an awesome staff from CPICS that are making this happen. So thank you, Violet. Thank you, Edward. And the next panel is going to start exactly in 15 minutes. So whatever your time zone is, you've got enough time to go heat up that burrito or the coffee or order a DoorDash or whatever it is you got to do. But stay tuned, folks. Let's see. We reach out, folks. Yeah. Maybe I'll ask the panelists, put your email in there if you want folks to get back to you. Let me type mine as fast as I have. Yeah, it's kind of long. And okay, so I'm I'm taking it right down to the last 30 seconds here. I got the timer here. Thank you, everybody. Let's do this. Fight, as Debbie says. Be resilient. The platform, you were on a big platform with a lot of people, and now I'm drawing a blank. Sonia, what was yours?
Fearless.
Fearless. Do not be panicked right now. Be fearless. Let's go surprise everybody. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you, guys.
Great session.